two modes of recording in hopes that one would...
Oh, you got two recorders?
Yeah.
Were you going to try and record, Jamie?
It doesn't record. I thought it did.
Anyway.
Okay, Mike, now you have to go tell a story.
Well,
No,
You got to listen now.
you can tell all you want.
Although I love you.
Mike, that's your chair over there. We got your name on it.
well, okay, I was going to invite a few more people to come off.
Oh.
Here.
But they have to be quiet.
Sounds like a school teacher to me.
Yeah.
You'll get this. This, what I think is interesting was just some recollections of Foster, and starting at Foster anyway, and, because things have changed so dramatically in our lifetime and yours. Somebody was talking about vegetables a while ago, and it just ran through my mind. People, even college kids, can't imagine not being able to go to the store and, well, I guess you were talking about Costco, getting fresh produce any time of the year. But just how life was, in your early recollections around the store and whatnot.
Well, okay. Well, this party's on October 29, 2011, I guess. The family is gathered at Eugene, Oregon, where we live at 84651 Needham Road, 97405. I forget the last four digits. And so a lot of the family are here. We're in my den, and this is following my 88th birthday on October 15, 2011, having born on October 15, 1923. Well, Arnie, I think when I think of Foster, one of the things that come to my mind is the electricity that we had in Foster, and for years and years until the late 20s, I think we didn't have electricity in our house there at Foster. So that house was a combined general merchandise store building, which my dad bought when he moved with his family out from Wisconsin in about 1912. He bought it in Foster, Oregon, so it had a general merchandise store, and those, by the way, were great rural institutions. And then attached to that two-story store building was a house that consisted of a kitchen, a living room, and then some called the front room. And so those were stacked, left to right. And when you made an exit from the living room, you went immediately into the store just through a small door. So it was pretty handy when you'd get up in the morning, and when the time was right, then Dad would go from the house into the store and unlock the front door of the store, and the store would be open. Might be 5-6 hours before any customer came, but that's the way it worked. Well, the electricity, we grew up with candles and lamps, and I guess Coleman lanterns, although I kind of think that they came along quite a bit later. So they were kerosene lamps and candles. But a fellow named Fred Wadley and his wife Emma Wadley immigrated from Germany in some time and came to Foster, Oregon. Excuse me. And Fred bought a site on Wiley Creek, which was a tributary just a couple of miles down to the South Santiam River. Well, this Fred Wiley was a very ingenious, I guess we now call him an entrepreneur, but he was an engineer and a builder, and so he built he built a dam, just a log dam on Wiley Creek that backed up a little bit of water, and then he made a couple of log ponds that flared out to the side of the Wiley Creek. There was a little bit of level land around there. And then he built a sawmill from which he manufactured lumber for the neighborhood. And then next to that was a flouring mill, so he'd grind the wheat if you bring it in and give it back to you as flour and make a charge for doing it. And then, as if that combination wasn't enough, he had a small electrical system. So in the evenings, he would turn the water through the generators and provide electricity. He's looking to turn this off for a bit. So Fred, in addition to providing lumber for the community, and then you to get that lumber, you could either bring in the log and he'd saw up your log and give it back to you, or he'd have some in inventory in the mill yard there and would sell it. So then farmers would bring in their grain, it would be converted to flour, and they'd go back. But then the electrical system was really unique and just great. And so in the winter, he only ran it in winter time because in the summertime it stays late light and you don't really need electricity. But in the winter, maybe starting in November or something, Fred would go down and turn a big wheel that would open the water that would come in the small canal and go through the generators and then dump down into Wiley Creek. So then when those generators would start turning, he'd start generating electricity, and he'd put in electrical lines probably to maybe 6 or 8 families around in this little unincorporated town of Foster that had a population of maybe a couple dozen. So he'd turn on the power and the lights would slowly start to, light bulb would slowly start to illuminate, and pretty soon you'd have a 60 or a 40 or a 60 watt globe that was illuminated. And then when Fred was ready to go to bed, he would go down to the mill and turn off the water going through the turbine, and so then the lights would slowly start to dim. So it was one of the kind of fun traditions of what we did. When the lights would start to dim, we'd all say, good night, Fred. Good night. That was the time to say good night to Fred. And then at some special holidays, Christmas or Thanksgiving, he'd stay up a little later, and maybe your lights would stay on till 10 o'clock instead of 8:30 or 9. Then finally, that Fred's power system, and come to think of it, it was quite ingenious that he had to buy those generators or something. They may have been sent over from Germany, and know how to install those in this little rural area, because I'm sure he and his family did it by hand. And Fred and Emma they had 4 sons, Louis and Eddie, and then the 2 youngest ones were Freddie and then Alvin. And Freddie and Alvin were my contemporaries and my friends that I grew up with. So we were pals during the time that we were growing up. And I remember that Wadley family very with a lot of affection, because Freddie and Alvin and I did all kinds of things. We swam in White Creek, and we swam in the Santiam River, and along with the near boys, Lyle and Don, we were pals and did lots of things. So Foster Foster, as I think back on it, was a great place for a kid to grow up. There were always, well, we were needed by the family. I had to split kindling and bring it in and help milk the cows. Oh, by the way, right behind the store, we had kind of a big backyard, but there was a barn there. Next to the barn was the outhouse, which was a three-holer, kind of upscale, and together with the Montgomery Ward catalog. There were commons around the town, and most people had cows, and we had a Guernsey cow named Spotty that gave a lot of milk.
And goats?
No, we didn't have goats, but those cows we'd let them out during the day, and they just go out and wander around Foster and go graze on the grass and browse on the trees. And then in the evening they'd come in, and then we'd feed them and milk them, and then milk them in the morning, and then let them out in the morning, and they'd be gone. And most of the time they'd come in by themselves in the evening. Once in a while something happened, you had to go out and look for the darn cows and bring them in. At one time, for some reason, I ended up with 2 Jersey calves that later became milk cows for us. They were named Molly and Polly, and gave very rich milk. And one of the things we prized at that time, and all the time when I was growing up, was not skim milk or low-fat milk. The more cream that was on a crock that you put the milk in, or that was in a jar, the better it was. And we sold milk to a couple of families, and that were down the road a half a block, and one about a block and a half. And one of my jobs was to deliver that milk to those 2 houses.
Make butter?
Yeah, Mother made butter regularly. You know, we had a churn, and all of the kids churned the butter at times. We'd churn it until it became butter, and then Mother would take care of it. But one of the things I remember about delivering this milk, which usually happened, I think, in the mornings. I'm a little vague about whether it was the morning or the end of the day. But anyway, over to one of the families, I want to say it was the Hershey's, delivered 2 of these quart jars of milk. And to take those along, and by banging them together just kind of lightly, they made quite a musical sound. And so you could kind of be a percussionist as you was delivering this milk and pounding away with that stuff going over. And I guess really I need to correct that, because it was coming back when you were bringing back the empty bottles that you could get the sound effects. One of the advancements that occurred there was when Fred's electrical system was replaced by Mountain States Power, and they put in lights. And you know, under FDR's regime, there was a rural electrification program to try to bring, just like you're now trying to bring the internet to rural areas and provide it by cable. At that time, the program was to electricity. So when the Mountain States came in, that was a big advance for us, because you had 24-hour-a-day electricity instead of 2 or 3 hours. Fred would turn it on before he would turn it off. And at that time, in the store, Dad bought a refrigerator, and which was, we thought was just the last word and really marvelous to have. One of the reasons was you could put pop in there, soda pop and root beer, orange pop and root beer, but also strawberry and other flavors, a few others. And it would be cold all the time. Well, this this refrigerator stood in the middle of that store for years and years, and it had two double doors that would swing wide and open up. But on the top of the refrigerator, the coils were there in a big circular model that stood about a foot and a half high and about that wide. And I guess the ammonia, or however you conduct refrigeration, would circulate through those coils. And that was a very, that refrigerator was there, as I remember, 20 years, just purred away and never created any problem. I don't know whether we had to defrost it once in a while or not. Maybe we did.
Did I remember rightly that Granddad and you or Norman soaked some ash staves in one of Fred's ponds over the winter and made wooden skis?
Well, yeah, both Norman and Arnold made skis out of ash, and but I don't recall that they soaked them down at Fred's place at the mill, but would put them in water and soak them. And think maybe hot water, heated water, and then put them in a clamp in some way and bend them up. Well, the first pair of skis that I had was a short pair that Arnold made for me, and I used those for quite a few years when we were in grade school. But we kind of spent our winters at Foster hoping and praying it would snow. You know, and some winters, winters, I'm sorry?
Did you ski to school?
No, we didn't ski. The school was quite close by, just about 3 blocks up to the grade school. But no, but we, whenever the snow would come, all the kids had homemade skis. And there weren't any very good hills in Foster, but there was a Letzinger hill that was up where the, I'm forgetting the name of the family. It was on the hills, Mike, above what is now the Foster Reservoir. The Harris family, I think of, and the Wadleys later lived up there.
Riggs?
And the Riggs, I think it was Riggs Hill and the Letzinger Hill. That's exactly right. And so it, I remember some of those skiing parties. Now, our skis, my skis that Arnold made for me weren't very long, but they had a hole through the center of the ski cut through, and then there was just a piece of leather that went through the ski and then was closed at the top, laced together with a little rawhide. And it was made of the size so you could slip your shoe into it and just slide it in and pull it out. Well, one of the nice things, that was kind of a good safety ski binding because you weren't locked into those bindings. And I remember particularly more on the Letzinger Hill than on the Riggs Hill that we just go up and then come straight down. You didn't try to make any turns. And the idea was if you could go from the top to the bottom, that was great. And if you fell along the way, you had to try it again. But at times, when we get going down there, moving along fairly good, if you got going too fast or you thought, boy, I'm not liking this, you could jump out of your skis. And but it was quite a trick to do that, because when you came out of them deliberately, then it's kind of like having the wind at your back when you're running. You're sort of running faster than your legs want you to run. So it took a little skill to be able to get out of those. And then, of course, when you jumped out, the skis didn't stop. So you always ended up going to the bottom of the hill to retrieve your skis, and then you go up and try it again. I think once in a while, those Wadley's milk ponds would freeze over, and we would go down and ice skate on those ponds. So we all had ice skates that screwed on, sort of like roller skates did for a time. And I have out in the shop a pair of ice skates that Dad brought with him from Minnesota and Wisconsin that are a beautiful pair of blades with a wooden mounting for them. And then in the front, and this is a very wide skate, and the blade's probably about 12, 14 inches long. It's not an awfully long blade. You had a couple little pins that would come up to the wooden binding, and that would kind of hold the front of your foot in place. But then in the back was a screw, just like a wood screw, that came up about about half an inch from the ski. So you take a special pair of shoes that were quite narrow that you could sacrifice, and then you would take the shoe there and put it down on that screw and turn the shoe around until the screw had gone all the way into the heel, and then you push it down in front, and then there's some holes in this wooden base for the blades, and then you would tighten up those leather thongs, and you'd have those skates on. Well, I recall that the ice was never very thick, and so it was always fairly high risk enterprise to go down and skate on those ponds. And Arne, you'll remember at the ranch, at the lower end of the ranch, there was a pond there. And you'll maybe remember, did we call that the duck pond or some kind of a pond at the lower end of the ranch that just emptied into the river? Do you remember that pond?
There's a little stream along the base of the hill.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that...
Beaver pond.
Oh, I think you're exactly right. It'd be a beaver pond. That's because it probably was closed at the lower end. And but I remember whenever we'd have a little ice, that was created an opportunity. Maybe we better go up to the beaver pond. Maybe it's frozen over. And so we'd go up and skate on that. I remember one time skating from the lower end up towards the upper end, and it was probably maybe 50 feet or that distance. But as I was skating along, and I think a couple other kids were there watching to see if this was going to work or something, but that ice began to undulate and go up and down a little bit. You realize, what do you say, you're on thin ice. And it certainly was. And of course, the more it wanted to undulate and move, the faster I tried to go. And I got within 10 or 15 feet of the bank before I went through. But I fell forward and headed toward the end of the pond.
Carolyn, did you see or skate on the...
Oh, I was going to mention on that, the skiing parties, one, and then this time we weren't at the Letzier place. No one was living there, but at the Riggs Hill. The Riggs were living there, or it might have been a predecessor family to the Riggs, I'm not sure. Anyway, we went up, Mother and Dad went along, all the kids and the Watleys and the Maniers, and everyone had homemade skis. Oh, and we had sleds, too. I had a steel runner sled, flexible flyer. Well, we went up and I'll call it the Riggs Hill. The Riggs Hill was just one of those hills where you'd go up and go down, and you weren't attempting any turns. But so we were going up and down the hill. And in the course of the evening, Mrs. Riggs went in and fried up a bunch of venison tenderloin steaks. And then brought out a big frying pan full of those with a loaf of bread. And so we got to take a slice of bread and put a piece of that venison steak and eat that, on a cold night.
Get the bread and the grease.
And I suppose so, but that was delicious. Well, what else, Arnie?
Nadine did a lot of canning. All the folks did back then, right? Yeah.
She used to can green bean and test whether they were good or not. She'd go, and I'd think, that could be the end.
Yeah, we didn't know anything about ptomaine poisoning, and it never seemed to show up. Well, yeah, you're right, Arnie. Mother would can 4 or 5 100 quarts of stuff every fall, and that was tomatoes and carrots and beets, but we had apples from the ranch, and so she'd make applesauce, and but also, though, she canned the meat. And so when we did a deer in the fall, some of the deer would be eaten, but the ribs would all be cut up and then canned to eat later. And I remember when I was in college, sometimes with some of the friends, we were going on very low budget skiing trips. And one of them particularly, we went down to Salt Lake to ski at the ski area sticking out of Salt Lake.
Oh.
Out of Salt Lake. Yeah, no.
Snowbird,
Alto. Yeah. Anyway, we had very limited budgets, and one of the things that I would take along, Bud would give us some of her cans of fruit or other stuff that she had canned, and we had several of those quart jars of these venison ribs. And my friends probably never had this, but everyone thought they were delicious. And once you had a bite of those, there was no hesitancy about, you wonder on the source of this meat and so forth. It was just great. What? Well, there was always a bunch of white grease on the top. You'd sort of take that off, and yeah, there would be some gelatin kind of material, but they were...
Yeah, it was a very great to the front. Diane, Arnold,
But she also canned peaches and pears. And there was a time that Michael remembered quite a bit about when we had a typhoid epidemic in the family. Quite a few of the family ended up having typhoid fever, which probably had its source in our outdoor toilets, which were pretty close to the shallow wells. In any event, one winter Dad became sick, and was sick for quite a long time, and was upstairs in the front bedroom that he and Mother used, and his fever was getting up in the 104 range and just wouldn't go on the way. And Dr. Langmack was called in and from Sweet Home 2 miles away. He didn't know what to do or what was causing this illness, and my sister Charlotte was working then in Portland for a doctor named J. Guy Strom, and he was to some extent a friend of the family, and Charlotte had for him and did work for years and years. Charlotte wasn't a nurse, but she was kind of the office nurse or something, and the receptionist, and did a bunch of the bookkeeping. Well, so Dr. Strom came down to find out what was wrong with Dad, or to look at. And as soon as he saw him, he said, "Oh my goodness, he has typhoid fever." Now, how he recognized this, we don't know, but the end result was Dad was taken in an ambulance to Portland because he was near death at that time. Went to the Good Samaritan Hospital and then gradually recovered. Well, Mother went up, took an apartment in Portland when Dad got out of the hospital because he was convalescent there for maybe a month or a month and a half. Well, so this left my brother Arnold, then, who was in high school, and had a good friend named Joe Short, and they were kind of a couple of wild guys from high school. Well, now here they are running the store, taking care of the post office, and supposedly taking care of Jim, because I was in grade school. And I remember our diet, our noon diet, was always to eat a quart of peaches with some bread and butter. And none of us liked pears. So we kept going on the peaches until 100 quarts of those were finished, and maybe we'd eat 2 quarts a day. So then when we finished the peaches, we went to the pears, kept that going until the pears were gone. And Joe and the Short family lived up towards Cascadia, a few miles from Foster. And Joe and Arnold were good friends. And the Short family was used to having venison all winter. And so Joe went out just from Foster and got a deer. I don't remember how many he got, but we always had fresh venison during that winter. And the venison was kept out. There was a building next door to the store, just kind of across the roadway, that we called the garage. I suppose it was called the granary, something like that. But we had wheat there that was sold to customers, and oats and potatoes that came from the ranch that were sold in the store. Well, Joe had a deer hanging up after it had been quartered and so forth out of the grain warehouse. And he'd go out in the evening and cut off a bunch of venison steaks and bring them back in and then fry those maybe with some onions and some potatoes. But one night he had the venison tenderloin steaks all cut up and floured and pounded a little bit. Something happened in the store, and Arnold called him in or something, so Joe went in the store to talk something, came back to put the steaks on. Turned out the house cat, had gone in there and smelled that steak, of course, jumped up on this table and had eaten all of those tenderloin steaks. Well, Joe was more than upset, and what do you do with this cat? And the solution was to go into the store and get some small paper sacks, of which we had quite a supply in the store. Tie one of those onto each foot of the cat and one over his head, tied down kind of securely, and then turn the cat loose on the slick aluminum floor. Well, the cat was quite perturbed at this fracas, and I remember the cat just trying to go every direction at once, sliding all around that floor until Joe felt that he'd gotten his revenge on this cat for eating our dinner venison.
Margaret Harrang told me was that Connie used to set up camp up in Cascadia during the summer.
Oh, no, I think that she did. It is kind of Cascadia, which is about 12 miles up the South Fork of the Santa Ana River from Foster, maybe 9 or 10 miles. There were, in the 30s, 2 hotels up there, and of course the Soda Springs is located there, and so it was a place that families would go and spend some time in the summer. So Mother, of all things, would take the kids, and this happened before I came along, or I was ever up there. But this would have been with Leona and Charlotte and Norman and Evelyn, and Dad go up, and they went up by wagon. Some of the time they might have had an old car to go up there, but I think their first trip a wagon. And they're still where we have the Memorial Day picnic, that lovely campground. And people camped there, and you could go over to the hotels and maybe have a meal. But I think they cooked themselves and took care of all that. So they'd spend a week up there and have the girls in white dresses and long white socks, and but they all enjoyed that. And they did the same thing in kind of a different way, that going over the coast once in a while. But they had to travel over there by car. But they go over and camp for a week or something in those early times.
Jim, when did you decide, or water wasn't the well?
At Cascadia or at Foster?
Wasn't it Foster?
Well, yes, and well, I think it was when people got sick.
And Margaret and Evelyn got it also?
Margaret got it, and I believe Norman ended up with typhoid. Arnold and I didn't contract it, but then we did have the water tested, and I think we started adding iodine to it, or try to do something to
Iodine.
I forget just how, or we boiled it maybe, trying to boil.
On one of those coast trips, I remember that JP looked at buying the sea lion caves, and then I think once did they have a fairly bad car wreck on the way back?
Well, he was over there with Bill Maley and going to the coast, and yeah, someone did want to sell the sea lion caves and I think a section of land, 640 acres of land that went with it. But the only way to get to it at that time was to come from the north side up towards kind of the side, I guess. And there was part of the way along the coast there was gravel and dirt road, but then at sections you had to go down and actually drive on the beach. And so you could only drive that section when during low tide. And the road, well, they went down and took a look at it. And his dad later recounted that possibility. He was inclined to want to buy it, and Bill was opposed to it, saying, well, there's no way to get to it, and they had to buy this. And Dad may not have been too sure it was a good idea either. Anyway, they passed it up and didn't buy the sea.
And did they have a car wreck on one of the coast trips?
Well, yeah, I think there were quite a few adventures. I don't remember a particular wreck, but they had a lot of flat tires. And I have some vague recollection of being over there in that Newport area on one trip when we were down on along the beach or getting to the got stuck. You know, it was difficult to get it out. But
wow,
it's full.
Carrier from Uncle Jim? I think so. Just your own love of the beach. While we're having a break, I had a pair of dinner at the Sally Phone Girl, and I just got a card from him, and it didn't work for much, but he got me a little pair of baby shoes that I sent to Sally when Sarah was yeah, fun. And she just wrote the sweetest card. Yeah, she said they're loving characters, but you're not getting any sleep. And I think what I have heard is Sally to Sarah is going to take some education.
One of those digital miracles supposed to go 139 hours. So let's see.
Well, I've been doing it when my brother's
Well, Meredith, you asked about the Gilberts and the beach. I think Mark and John did like to go to the beach and did a lot. Main thing I remember is one beach over there called Big Stump Beach was one of their favorites. And Mike, you may know where that's located, up somewhere in the vicinity of the Newport area, I guess. South of Walport, yeah. At one point, Dad did buy a lot in Yachats up on the hillside there, and thinking that he might build a summer home or something over there, but that never did happen, and eventually the lot was sold.
That was kind of a major trip from Foster at that time, wasn't it?
It surely was, yes. Yeah.
Take,
yeah.
what, a full day, or?
Yeah, I don't remember the duration of those trips very much. But one thing you mentioned driving. Growing up, one of my main recollections of being a kid was of all the fun we had and fun things to do. And Dad had a 1929 Dodge, a four-door sedan that one night caught fire, a battery fire, electric fire or something. And so somebody discovered it, and it was put out before it totally burned. But all the upholstery went out, particularly the back seat and all. So after the fire, that 1929 Dodge was made into kind of a semi-pickup and had a little wooden frame on the back, didn't have doors, didn't have a windshield, and did have some floorboards, but plenty of space to see down to the road underneath. And I remember that, and so this became my vehicle. And then Freddie and Alvin Wadley also had one, and theirs was a Chevrolet Roadster, probably a late 1920. And the Minear, Don and Alvin Minear also had an old car. So we had used those cars to go out and drive on the gravel roads and the old logging roads. Did a couple of things. One was to go out at the end of the day on some of those roads and have one driver, a couple of guys standing up in the back with 22s, and we would hunt for grouse. And about 4 in the afternoon, 5, when you drive along those roads, once in a while, a flock of grouse might be in the roadway. And we did a lot more driving than we did shooting grouse, but I think once in a great while we did get one. I remember the car I had, the Dodge, it didn't have a license, but on the front of it, there was one of these signs that you could buy that had a black background with silver speckle used to create some writing on it. So there was one of those signs that said, "Keep smiling." And so that's what I had on the front of the Dodge in place of a license plate. And for quite a few years, the steering wheel, it had pretty much burned. It was a wooden steering wheel, but so there were 4 spokes came out from it, but you had to drive it from just using those spokes. The wheel was gone. But we always thought that wouldn't, if you're going to hit anything, and those, for the spokes of that wheel, only 4 of them there, that wouldn't feel good in your chest. And somewhere we found another steering wheel that still had the wooden wheel in parts, and was able to put that on the column and then just tighten that, and all of a sudden you had a steering wheel, which was great. You would didn't have a key, but you would power it up electrically by the end of an electrical cable out in the front that you would just manually put against the battery, the positive terminal of the battery, and then we would always start it by just pushing the car a little bit and putting it in high gear and clutch in, and then putting it in high gear, let the clutch out, and wham, away it would go. Fred Wadley had some bottom land and a road that went up behind the mill and went down to it. And there was a meadow down below that had kind of short grass and quite a hard surface. And we found that was a great place. Freddie'd bring his car and I'd bring the Dodge. And you could get that going 15, 20 miles an hour across that stuff, and then spin the wheel, and the car would slide just like it was on snow or ice. And the trick was to be able to do a 360 all the way around and then just keep going. You know, if you could do that in just kind of one rhythmic maneuver, why, you were a winner.
Was that there when you...
Yeah, well, yeah, the Red Bridge, as we call it, was about probably half mile, three-quarters of a mile from the store and the house in Foster. And we could swim in the mill ponds down at Fred's Mill, the Wadley Mill. But over at the Sandy Am, the middle pier of that bridge was a bunch of smooth bedrock that had quite a few different elevations and platforms. And so some of the smooth rock would be right down at water level, you know, a great place to lie down on your stomach, and then you could go up 4 or 5 feet, and here was another little platform of some kind, and one up high, maybe 7, 8 feet. And those were, and then the water there was, it could be 20, 25 feet deep, and in the summer it was a very nice temperature for swimming. So one of the things, Margaret was a swimming instructor, and she would give us a life-saving course. And if you passed that course, then you'd end up getting a little badge, sort of like some kind of a scout badge that you could sew onto your...
What did she test you on?
Oh, you had to be able to go out and somebody was pretending to drown and they were facing you, and so you had to duck dive down, turn them away from you so you came up on the backside of them, and then you'd put your hand under their chin and pull them back, and then you'd swim with a side stroke to take them to shore. But you also learn to give artificial respiration, you know, so pump the water out of their lungs and things like that. But Suzanne, one of the great things about that swimming hole at the Red Bridge was their, I think maybe Dad first installed this. Anyway, a chain came about 30 feet down from the bottom of the bridge and hung about 6, 7 feet above the water. And then at the bottom of that chain was, we called it a ring. It's kind of a triangular piece of pipe that was fitted onto the end of the cable, of the chain that came down from the bridge. Well, from the rock down there, you could reach out with a stick and grab the ring and bring it in and then walk it back up on the rock there until there was just a great platform where you'd reach up with both hands, take a hold of the ring, swing back a little bit, and then go out. And as you were going out, you'd swing your feet forward and then swing your feet back, so when you came to the end of your swing, your feet were coming back. Then you'd let go with your hands and duck at the waist, you know, and make a nice dive. Or if you were agile, you could even do a front flip and before you hit the water. And then there was one of the older kids there, Vester Johnson, that was kind of considered just a little bit of a lower lifer. He didn't quite, my parents weren't totally approving of him. One of the main reasons was he didn't keep his shirt tail tucked in. He was always that shirt tail. And why doesn't Vester, you know? Anyway, it was Vester for his size was very strong. And so once in a while, on a weekend or something, he might agree to, when we'd get the ring back and we're up on this little rock platform, he'd get in front of us, face us, and then put his hands on your hips and then walk you back up the rock so that in the end your feet were reaching back and touching the center bridge pier. And then you're there because now you know you're really going to get a swing. And of course he'd have to let go, duck off to one side, and then you had to have your feet up when you were going over these rocks. Then as soon as you cleared the rocks, you got your feet down and then got your swing going. So at the end of that swing, you would then complete your dive. But when he would do that, you'd be swinging so hard that slack would develop in the chain up above. So, you know, you're climbing like you're going to go up to the bottom of the bridge. So, but that was always an exciting time to try to take that long swing and still make a good dive out of it. And then, Suzanne, we loved to dive down and get things. And from the Kerr Mason jars, those all had inside rings that were made of glass and were white glass. And I don't know, Carolyn, you might know what those were called. Anyway, they were great. They're about the size of a Kerr Mason lid, and then you could throw those into the river and see them very clearly down 15, 20 feet. So we'd throw out, one of the games was to see how many of those you could get one breath of air, you know. So maybe you could get to a half a dozen of them before you finally had to shoot up and bring them in and do it over again.
Did Norman break an eardrum? Thought he lost a wristwatch or something and dove to the bottom. Had a problem with that ear or ears afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's true. I have a very limited recollection of that. But yeah, I think he did dive too deep one time. I think that water was under the center of the bridge, 20, 25 feet. The Chinook salmon would come up there in the summer. And from the bridge at times, when they were pooling there before they'd go upstream to spawn, you might see 2 or 3 dozen of them just lazily swimming in circles down there. And quite often we would take a fishing pole up from the bridge and put it down with a spinner on it. And about all the thing you could do from the bridge there was with some sinker, some lead on it, let it go down, and then bring it back up until the blades would turn. And we try to agitate those Chinook. How we ever thought we'd land one, if we ever got one, I'm not sure. But I don't recall we ever did get one to bite. But we get excited, you know, and they dart around like they were going to take that triple barbed hook, which they didn't do. No, he didn't ever have boats. You know, I think both Dad and Mother were so busy with their life and raising kids and running the store, and there were 7 kids, that they didn't have time for that. Anyway, didn't do that. But up from Sweet Home, up at the Wiley Creek Road, or near the end of it, the Scanlon family lived. And there were 2 Scanlon boys. I didn't have much recollection of the parents, but I remember the 2 sons, and they made dugouts out of probably cedar logs, and somehow gave those to us. So we had a small dugout that was about the length of the Davino here in the den, maybe even a short Davino, and one was a little bit longer. And so we used those primarily down at Fred's Mill Ponds and up on Wiley Creek for years and years. But that's the only kind of boat we ever used.
Well, that sounds like barter.
Well, there wasn't, I don't think that bartering was part of the economy out of his store. It was almost universally a credit business. I don't think anyone ever paid cash for things, and Dad in the store, and I think a picture in the house showing Dad at the store, there was a piece of equipment called the cash register, which was quite a nice piece of equipment, and it had a bunch of panels in the back, and about 10 or 12 of them. And then you had a lever at the right side that would run back and forth horizontally, and you could stop it to bring up panel 1 or go over and get panel 3, 4, 5, one at a time. When you bring the panel up, you would have about a dozen kind of small envelope-sized locations to put charge slips. And then there was a little metal, sort of like on a mousetrap, a little metal piece that would come forward, and when it was on a spring, and when you release it, it would go back against the panel. Well, so if the Shaw family would come in and buy something, and say, charge it please. And so you'd write it on these charge books, and that was in duplicate, and the original one you would put in the cash register and put it up behind their name. Everybody had a name, and that location was just for their purchases. And then one of our jobs was to once in a while go through the cash register and add up the individual charge slips that were there, carry a balance forward to the next one. So then if somebody wanted to pay their bill, why, you'd go and get those slips, add them up, and they would know how much their bill was. And that was kind of good arithmetic training, because you'd scan those numbers and see how quickly that you could add them.
Can you describe the
Yeah, well, the grade school was about a block and a half from the store. Went out the store and traveled, I guess it would be east. First you went by the Evangelical Church, which is a small wooden frame church building with a small spire, and then across the North Courtsville Road, and then you come to this fairly good-sized white frame building that was a two-story building, and the bottom floor was just the wood storage and a fairly big wood furnace, and not much else. And then there were, in front of the school, there were steps that took you up to the second floor, and you went in, and there was a little vestibule behind the doors, and if you turned right, you went into the little room, which had the first 4 grades, and if you turned left and went through that door, you went to the big room, which had 5, 6, 7, and 8. So there was one teacher for each room, and that was a great school. I have very fond memories of going to there. Some of those memories, my first grade teacher was Mosier, and I'm not recalling her first name, but like a lot of first graders, I was in love with Miss Mosier, certainly. The way she smelled, the way she dressed. And then a gentleman named Bob Keebler turned out to be a teacher when I was there. And those teachers would come and room with somebody in Foster, live in somebody's house, and then go each day to teach the class, and then go back. Yeah, just after I was out of the Army, I think before I got in the Army, which began in 1941, I went to grade school and then 4 years of high school, and then stayed at home for a year before I started enrolled at Oregon State. After I was going to start a college career, war was coincident with that time, and I got into an enlisted. Went over to Oregon State in the fall, and heard about an enlisted reserve corps, thinking, well, that sounds like kind of a good place. Enlisted, reserve, I kind of like the reserve part of it, and so I got in that ERC and turned about once before we got orders that we were called up. So we were kind of a feeder organization for me. But I'd heard then about the ski troops and your ability to, since we'd done some skiing on our homemade skis, that sounded like the place I'd like to end up. But you needed 3 letters of recommendation to get in. And so I got a letter from Gilbert Sprague, who was the principal of the high school, and he had been the advisor for our ski club, and we'd go up the South Fanny M Highway was opened about that time. And by the way, Mike, you'll probably remember Mike. John worked on that highway crew in building that South Fanny M. Maybe did that even for a couple of years. So Sprague had done some skiing, and so he got this little ski club going. I think there were 8 or 9 of us in it. One year I was the president of that club. It might have had 5 or 6 members. And then the other, I got a letter from the district ranger, whose name was Burgess. And so he, these people just said something, and I might have gotten the 3rd letter from Bill Maley, because the Maleys were kind of an important family in the community. But we always thought that it was very unlikely that anyone ever read those letters, but you had to show enough initiative to get 3 letters of some kind, and if you did that, why? So I got signed, was called up, and my parents, one rainy afternoon and evening in March, took me over to Corvallis in March of 1942, and we said goodbye there, and I got on a train and went up to Fort Lewis. There I met Russ Fullman, who was also, his family were skiers up on Mount Hood. And we stayed there about 2 weeks, just kind of in rainy March at Fort Lewis, Washington, until some orders came through, and both Russ and I were assigned to the 10th Division in order to report over to Colorado. So we ended up taking a train over and got off the train at Pando, Colorado, which is a little one-station building, no one there, but adjacent to Camp Hale. So but I didn't really do any mountaineering. But we drove the old cars. We did a lot of fishing in all of the little creeks there, and the Santa Ana River and Whitey Creek, but a lot of other smaller creeks, and quite a bit of hunting with our 22s and some deer hunting in the fall with John. No, it was. I think it was indefinite. You just got in an enlisted corps, and it didn't have any term or.
The 10th Mountain Division guys ended up going back there, and they actually created Vail Ski Area. Did you know any of those?
Probably not. And the Engel brothers created the areas down at Salt Lake. Out of Salt Lake, and over in Colorado as well. Don Brown, Nadine's brother-in-law, who married Marva, Nadine's sister Marva. I remember his stories always include that most of the ski areas in the country were started by guys who came out from the 10th. And one of the reasons for that was that they didn't know how to do anything else. So, well, yeah, that's right. Started. No, I don't remember any particular conversation, but thinking back about that, you realize that it must have been a very poignant experience for them. But they didn't ever show any anxiety or concern or any idea that I shouldn't be going off to war or something. No, my dad was kind of, and both my parents, being the youngest, as Nadine is in her family, myself being the youngest of 7, I think the parents had spent enough time bringing kids up. Let them take care of themselves. I don't remember any particular advice any time. I think Dad, he was looked upon by all the kids as kind of a stern figure, and had a wry and good sense of humor, but not inclined to give advice of any kind. For instance, the store had a cash register where the money, the silver, and the paper kept, and all the time I was growing up in high school, and the 1 year I was there between high school and college, if I needed money, I just went to the cash register and got it out. And
I remember this. I was really impressed that you could just go in and get any money that you needed.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that.
Somehow that system worked because it And Dad, by the way, seldom carried money. If we'd go to Albany and somebody want to buy something, well, that'd be okay, but I don't have any money. And quite often, I'd be the only one that would have any money. And I have, $4 or $6 or something.
Well, I know Sydney knows it. Well, not at the University of Oregon. I think through some of your...
Well, one of my...
So you were a beaver and then you became a duck. Is that what we're hearing?
Yes, after I came back...
He was a duck when I met him.
I got out of the Army, I decided that I would have better luck and more of a fighting chance at the University of Oregon than I would at Oregon State, where they wanted you to understand mathematics. And I would rather work with language. But Nadine and I met because...
you were living at the house.
Westminster.
Yeah,
I was living at the Westminster House, and which was right on campus on Kincaid Street, within the stone's throw of the main library on the campus. Couldn't have had a better place to live and go to school, and they just had a couple of rooms there that were rented to anyone that wanted to rent them. Well, my 10th Division acquaintance, who I hadn't known during the time we were in Camp Hale or in Italy, was there, and somehow he invited me to come and room with him because these rooms were large enough to have 2 occupants. And I did that, and it turned out that Don's girlfriend was Nadine's sister, Marva. And so then, Nadine, you must have come sometime at Westminster House, and so we met. And and one thing I remember about our acquaintance, when Don and Marva were married, kids were certainly getting for a honeymoon. Well, Don happened to know someone who had a cabin at Crescent Lake up over the Willamette Pass, and this cabin was made available to them for 10 days and free. And so, but Marvin and Don then, after the wedding, which was in Westminster House, needed to get up to Crescent Lake. So that somehow I had my dad's 1945 Buick 2-door sedan, which was a luxurious automobile, and I had it there in Eugene, or maybe they made arrangements to get it, and so I was take them up to Crescent Lake and drop them off and come back. So they had several boxes of groceries and their outfits, and then since there was room for 4 in the car, and I didn't want to drive back all alone, I started asking Nadine if she wouldn't come to Crescent Lake with us. Well, she was going to have to wash her hair that night, and it wasn't feeling too good, and I didn't think, well, I thought Marva could be my ally. So, Don went to Marva, and Marva, can't you get Nadine to go with us up? So they tried their best and all kinds of offerings, but nothing worked, so the 3 of us went up, and I drove back alone.
Oh, well, that was a good place to interpolate this, but really, because I fell in love with his mother and dad.
Oh, this has probably gone on much too long, so yeah, we probably ought to, some of you folks have got some driving to do, but we thank you so much for coming down for this party. By the way, are you leaving some chili? All the time.
There's 2 things of chili.
Oh, great.